Recording. Okay, and now you can begin, Dr. Edwards, and I'll do the...
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our third webinar for 2025 for World Women in Neuroscience. As you know, World Women in Neuroscience is in its 15th year, and we're extremely pleased to have you join us into this webinar. Our mission remains the same. We really want to advance the careers of women in neuroscience. We are developing networks, and more importantly, we are transforming your communities. So thank you so much for joining us. We wanted to implore you to actually scan the QR code and really actively follow us in all the social network that we post our material in. So please do that right now. Scan the QR code and just follow us on all of those social networks. Having said that, I would like to take the time to introduce our speaker today. Susan Magsamen is a friend, colleague, and collaborator. She is the founder and executive director of the International Arts Plus Mind Lab, Center for Applied Neuroaesthetic, a groundbreaking neuroaesthetic initiative at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. In addition to her role at the IAM Lab, she is the co-director of the NeuroArt Blueprint project in partnership with the Aspen Institute. She's also the author of Impact Thinking, an interdisciplinary translational research model, and co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us, written for the general public. So Susan works focuses on how the art and aesthetic experiences measurably change the brain, the body, and behavior, and how this knowledge can be translated to inform health, well-being, and learning programs in medicine, public health, and education. I'm tremendously pleased to have Susan give us a webinar today and share with us her insight on the potential of utilizing the arts for health. Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. It really is an honor to be here. I think we go to 10 o'clock, right? And so I want to stop at about 9:45, just so we can really have a discussion. And when I was...
Just one follow-up on this, for all the participants who wish to pose their questions, you're free to do that while the webinar is also going on in the Q&A section, or raise your hands and I will let you I'll let you ask your question during the Q&A session. Thank you. Please continue.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I've thought a lot about this talk, and I'm as I said, I'm really honored to be talking with you today. We are I think many of us are probably mothers and sisters and women. I'm a social scientist, I am a collaborator, and I feel like I am a colleague with many of you. And, I have thought a lot about sort of how my work has grown as a woman in this field. And I just wanted to share a couple personal remarks before I jump into the talk. I am one of five sisters. I was raised in a family of women. We had 6 female dogs, 2 female cats, 4 female horses, various mice, and other rodents that we loved deeply. My grandmother lived with us. And I was really raised to believe that women weren't separate from men, but that we just lived in a house where we did everything. And my mother really believed that it was possible to figure out what your passions were and to make them happen. And without any question that you could make your dreams come true. And so when I entered what I love this term, real world, I realized that things were a little more complicated. And but what I gained as a kid was this ability to persevere and to find a way to share my voice and my story, and to use those skills that I learned in problem solving and collaboration and community to be able to make that happen. And I think it's only in the rearview mirror now when I look back and I sort of see how that training as a child really has allowed me to do the work that I do now. And just two other points. One is that I'm a twin. And so I had the amazing gift of being conceived in relationship, to be in a womb where I had to, twist and turn and move and have a lyrical relationship with another person. And I think that that's a gift, but I think that women do that quite naturally in the ways that we move through the world. And so, I learned this morning that female mice are no longer required to be studied. And that sort of blew my mind because I think that women in all different species are unique. And as we move into the world that we're now in, I think we have to come back to what it means to really be female and what it means to bring these gifts forward in collaboration, in community, and with resilience and the kinds of problem solving skills that I think we have. So I hope we get a chance to talk more about how that happens for us as we discuss. But I would love to share as a colleague some of the work that I've done. Creative expression has been a through line my whole life, as I mentioned. And it just turns out that that's really what I continue to study and to try to move forward as a field. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen with some assistance. One moment, please. Okay, let's see if I got this right. Am I up correctly?
Yes. Can you see
All
your
right.
notes on the side?
Right, so you can see Your Brain on Art screen?
Yes.
Okay,
You're
great.
able to see your notes? It's good?
I can, thank you,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, so I'm
Okay, good.
gonna be mindful of the time. I'm gonna talk for about 30 minutes, and then let's
Okay.
open it up to a much larger discussion. So you heard that I co-authored a book called Your Brain on Art. And this book came out in 2023. And over the course of writing the book, it took about 5 years to write the book. My co-author, Ivy Ross, and I interviewed over 120 people around the world. And what we were able to really understand was ancestral knowledge, lived experience, the artistic process in terms of creative expression, and also the way that academic research fields look at art. And it's only been in the last 20 years that we've really been able to study the arts non-invasively. But in just 6 days, the book did become a New York Times bestseller. We're now in our 12th reprinting. We have international rights in over 13 countries and growing. And the trajectory of the book really sort of blew our publisher's mind, because books about art do not become bestsellers. And what I think now in reflecting is that the book validates what we already knew about the arts intuitively. And it also has given us permission to express our voices and to make art again. I think it also has been a catalyst for educational curriculum, for strengthening communities, for developing HR programs, for even rethinking urban planning and architecture and design, and also to create more programs, but importantly, policies in healthcare and public health. And, I don't want to overstate this, because we are really at the beginning of those initiatives, but the science, what you do, the science of the arts, is really what's driving this field. It's not the anecdotal information. It's not, expression of how we feel. It's the science that's really helping to drive this. And I think we're going to see more of that as more science really grows. I also think the book was so successful because the world is hungry for better solutions. And I think that's something that this work really offers. So in the book, we make a bold claim that we're standing on the verge of a cultural shift in which the arts can deliver potent and accessible, proven health and well-being solutions to billions of people. And when I define art and creative expression, I'm talking about all forms of arts and aesthetics. And many are being created every day through the use of technology and other kinds of immersive experiences. So this is a chart that I love. It's a representation of all of the many art modalities that we already know, from things like visual arts to culinary arts, gardening, you'll see in here, architecture, traditional artisan craft and handwork. For me, it's a pantry of ingredients. It's a new periodic table of endless combinations of ways that you can combine these kinds of expressions to solve different kinds of problems. And I think as we're seeing the science of these different art forms start to help us understand the uses and the value of them. But, that really has made me think more deeply about the role the arts once played in our lives. And as Ivy and I wrote the book, we were able to talk to some of the indigenous cultures around the world. And what we learned is that there's still over 5,000 active tribes, and many of them don't have a separate word for art because it's literally how they live their lives, how they live their daily lives in terms of rituals and traditions. So this is a cave painting that was found in Bulgaria, and it's believed to be about 10,000 years old. And it really depicts meaningful stories and events that are happening in the day-to-day life of this community. This is a story cloth that was recently stitched that illustrates the joys, the struggles, the triumphs through a program called Common Threads Project. And this piece was made by a group of young women who were sex trafficked and abused for many years. Yet at the same time, it's not difficult to compare this to the Bulgarian cave art, where while there's different materials being used, we are still telling our stories of what matters most to us. And we're still trying to make sense of our world. So if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, it's a little cut off, but you can see there's a home. You can see that there's conflict, but you can also see that there's a picnic and there are children playing, and there are also clouds, there's sun, and there's also a rainbow. So this idea of how do we express sorrow and joy? How do we think about sharing our deep feelings of sadness and fear, but also safety and happiness continues to be something that makes us so uniquely human. So I think just like 10,000 years ago, we are still drawn to elicit both sort of the darkness and the light, and to be able to continue to try to understand and make meaning of what happens to us and with us, both individually and in community. This is another example of a piece of art that was found by geologist David Zhang in Tibet. It's believed to be 226,000 years old. And if you look closely, you can see the symbolic representation of hands. These are the same tools that we still use today to create our world. Think about it. These are the very same tools. I think we humans have been makers and beholders since the beginning of time. And in writing the book, Ivy and I had the opportunity to meet with E.O. Wilson, the Harvard evolutionary biologist, who told us that these experiences that we create with our hands are the transformational and transcendence that are essential for our human species to have evolved. So in other words, arts and aesthetic experiences are a birthright. They're part of what makes us uniquely human. But at the same time, most of us today think of ourselves as thinking creatures that feel, but we're actually feeling creatures that think. This is a quote from Jill Bolte Taylor, who is a neuroanatomist. And now, cognitive neuroscientists believe that we're only conscious of about 5% of our mental activity. The rest of our experiences, physical, emotional, and sensorial, lie below that conscious level. And so we really only now know that we're beginning to understand that how we bring this information into our bodies and how that information gets processed through our sensory systems is really how we understand the world and how we build strong neural pathways. You heard this definition of the work that I do in neuroaesthetics, but you know, in the past, philosophers, artists, and children have always known the power of the arts. And because we're now able to get inside our brains to really understand more about what's happening, and data science and AI, by the way, are also enhancing this, the study of neuroaesthetics and the science of neuroaesthetics is beginning to emerge. So the definition of neuroaesthetics is the study of how arts and aesthetic experiences measurably change our brains, bodies, and behavior. And importantly, how this knowledge gets translated into practice that advances physical and mental health, well-being, learning, public health. It is a translational discipline, and it's critically important that the science and the research and the translation is rigorous, and it can be repeated, and that it starts to really become a hugely reliable discipline as we start to move it into the world. Neuroaesthetics lies at the intersection of the arts and aesthetics, technology and medicine, health and science. And it makes it by design a highly interdisciplinary field. And again, as I said, rigorous research has to be at the heart of this. You know, in the last couple of years, we have seen a tremendous growth in the acceleration of the science. Anjan Chatterjee put this chart together, and I think it really visually illustrates that even over the last several years, the research through a PubMed search has shown that it's just skyrocketing in terms of the number of peer-reviewed aesthetic papers in a number of different kinds of journals. I think that speaks to the interdisciplinary nature of it, but I think it also speaks to the fact that more and more researchers are gravitating to neuroaesthetics and to thinking about how, as an integrative and complementary discipline, this work can really help to really move the needle on some of the most intractable things that we're facing. NeuroArts is what the field is called, that really includes all of the different partners, including researchers, practitioners, funders, community organizations. It's a much larger group that's really moving forward to really try to coalesce this field at a global level. So multiple sectors are engaged here. And I think it's interesting and sort of exciting that we are literally seeing a new field come into being right before our very eyes. This has not existed before. It's a burgeoning field, and I think I liken it some ways to what neuroscience was 75 or 100 years ago, or what women's health is, or bioethics, or even climate change. These are relatively new fields. So we're finding our way through how to do that. And the work that I've been doing with others in the NeuroArts Blueprint is really trying to take what is a movement and really create a strategy and a roadmap to move that forward. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about that in our discussion area. But, you know, basic science and academic science is really important, but there's other ways of knowing. And with something that's so generative and dimensional as the arts, when we think about how you study this work, we do incorporate ancestral knowledge and indigenous culture. We do want to include lived experience. We do want to include artistic practice, and also marry that in what I consider to be a really extraordinary alchemy to get a much deeper lens on how do we approach some of the most intractable issues. So in that regard, I think of NeuroArts as truly solution science. You know, the evidence for the arts is really growing, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think one of the big takeaways around arts and aesthetic experience is that we're now seeing at a very high level that the arts simultaneously alter a complex physiological network of interconnected neurological and biological systems. And you can see some of them listed here, you know, from respiratory and circulatory systems to our immune and muscular systems. And the arts and aesthetic experiences are also impacting our brains and bodies like no other modalities. We're starting to see more and more of these interconnections that are just unique to these kinds of experiences. You know, we're discovering that the arts are really super powerful neuromodulators. This is an image that was developed for us by Greg Dunn. Greg is a neuroscientist, and he's also a very talented artist. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, other than to say that I think what he is showing and what the science is beginning to show us is that the complexity and integration of brain systems and structures when you start to look at the arts are enormous. And, when you start to understand the core neurobiology and the mechanisms that are involved, it's really across the entire brain. There's a lot of different kinds of researchers that are beginning to study this work. But some of the really core research areas that are emerging include things around the sensory systems and mechanisms, neuroplasticity, reward systems, function and structure. Saliency and the default mode network have really expanded dramatically over the last couple of years, and I think we're going to start to see more and more of that. And then this work around the mind-body connection is also continuing to grow. And I think there's great opportunity to really begin to start to see how that work is going to affect things like neurodegeneration, rehabilitation, even looking at child development, and also thinking more deeply around the role of this work in mental health and well-being. So I want to sort of pull back a little bit and talk a little bit about the metaphor of the elephant in the room, which I think is really relevant to the way this field is growing. First, when I think about the arts and aesthetic experiences, they're incredibly powerful, like an elephant. Secondly, we're seeing that depending upon what parts of this work you're touching, whether that's for Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or mental health or child development or end-of-life care or PTSD and trauma, you're really activating different parts of the brain and using different modalities and different methodologies, even thinking about different doses and dosages to be able to get the kind of results that we're hoping for. And third, I think that the elephant represents a cautionary tale. If we don't nurture and protect the arts, we will lose them. They have really been marginalized in the last several hundred years. They're seen as a nice to have, not a have to have. And so, as we move forward in building this field, I think it's really important to know that if the arts continue to be sidelined and not part of mainstream medicine and public health and education, we lose a huge part of ourselves. Even pulling back a little bit further, we're now seeing that the arts are already being deployed in every sector of society, and the momentum is growing. It's been wonderful to see at NIH, Francis Collins really champion the work, investing over $40 million over the last 5 to 7 years in music research through the Sound Health Initiative. And through the work of Emmeline and others, the NIH toolkit for researchers has also been created. And this toolkit is super important. It provides protocol guidelines, it provides recommendations for biometric tools and techniques, and also agreed upon outcome measures for music related to aging. And we've also now seen the launch of 4 arts and health networks that are being designed to build a research foundation in this area. So this work is in music and sound. But what's wonderful about this work that's already been completed and continuing to grow is that it's forming the baseline for other art forms to be able to follow this same path of rigorous research and the kind of requirements that are needed for really powerful research and ultimately for translation. So I don't think I need to tell you that we're facing some of the most intractable issues of our time. And many of these cannot be dealt with the current solutions that we have. And I think this is where NeuroArts holds the promise of humanizing medicine, democratizing healthcare, and improving public health and transforming education and learning. The arts are accessible, they're immediate, and they're affordable for prevention, for practice, and for intervention. And so there's some really extraordinary research that has come out in the last several years that I think makes this a really fabulous target for additional work. One is that making and beholding the arts is not dependent on age, ability, race, or income. And one of the most extraordinary findings for me is that you don't have to be talented, gifted, or good at the arts for them to have significant impact. And that is not to say that fabulous artists and people practicing art should not continue, but not all of us are that kind of high-performing artist. Yet the benefits are really extraordinary. They can be practiced both as standalone or complementary interventions. And the arts on prescription or social prescribing is also emerging, where healthcare providers are literally writing prescriptions for the arts and aesthetic experiences. So I just want to share a few examples to illustrate some of that. But before I do, I just put this slide in the deck this morning, and I want to come back to this as we talk about women's health and the role of women in science, because I think these statistics around workplace also really speak to some of the intractable issues that we're addressing. And, you know, when you look at the high rate of burnout, the growing issues around talent retention and even recruitment, and you're thinking more deeply about workplace stress or disengagement, or this idea of slow quitting, where people are just slowly stepping back, understanding skill gaps based on lack of training or lack of mentorship, and also looking at the younger generation that is feeling less motivated to be part of a traditional workforce, and thinking more deeply about what are some gig economy kinds of startup opportunities. I think there's a lot for us to talk about in this idea around how arts and aesthetics can help change healthcare and education, but also how we can begin to use some of this methodology and practices on an individual level. So I wanted to sort of frame that here. But in just thinking about some of the ways that we're seeing this work show up, we are seeing it show up in child development, and also understanding through some of the really beautiful research that's done that playing and listening to music, we know for young children increases neuroplasticity, and through different kinds of interventions actually builds gray matter to support cognitive skills, social emotional development, and resilience. There's some really beautiful work coming out of Scandinavia now that's using music and singing for bonding and for maternal health. And we're seeing that the impact of moms singing with their babies is actually showing significant reduction in postpartum depression. And that, in many cases, is resulting in the reduction of antidepressant medications. In neurodegeneration, we're seeing through almost 40 now peer-reviewed papers and growing the proof that dance improves gait, mood, sleep, cognition for people with Parkinson's disease. And importantly, it's lowering feelings of loneliness and enhancing belonging, which has enormous effects on physical and mental health. During the pandemic, a program called Dance for PD, which is part of the Mark Morris Dance Company, expanded their work into 28 countries through Zoom. So formally, people came and danced in a studio, and usually once a week. While they were able to move this program online, people began to dance more often and longer, and they started to experience greater symptom relief. So this study's around Parkinson's and dance is starting to get at something that's super important, which is how we think about dose and dosage related to Parkinson's and dance. And this work is really robust and continuing to grow. In dementia and Alzheimer's, there's been quite a bit of work, and some of it has been really advanced through the work of NIH, where singing, playing, and listening to music is helping to improve cognition and quality of life. Also to reduce agitation and improve behavioral issues that are really more common in early and mid-stage dementia. Even in late stage, we're seeing that people continue to be able to tap to a beat and often to sing lyrics that they learned from early childhood. In a recent NeuroArts Blueprint economic study, we have now shown a 3-to-1 return on investment for caregiver care when singing is used with this kind of dementia care. We're doing a couple of other what are called true value economic analyses that are now underway, and they're showing even higher cost savings that can be then reused into other ways to help to support people with dementia and Alzheimer's. Chronic pain, music is reducing the anxiety of folks up to 44%. You can see pain by 28%. And these AI-based arts and neuroscience startups are on the rise. And these programs are really starting to have real inroads in FDA breakthrough approvals. So when you start to think about low-cost, technology-based, non-invasive complementary treatments, you start to see a whole new ecosystem emerge that I think starts to speak to the health of a new field. And there's many examples of the way this is happening that I think are really very promising. In PTSD and trauma, there's growing evidence around the arts and mental health. Creative Forces is an amazing program that the DoD, the Veterans Administration, and the NEA have developed that's working with both vets and active military. And what they're seeing is that the arts help to address trauma that blocks the brain's speech regions and also lowers activation in the amygdala. So first responders are now using this to not only address PTSD, but also ongoing chronic stress and anxiety. And we're seeing this work show up in refugee settlements, in disaster relief, and also in the justice system. What we're now really understanding is that 45 minutes of an art project, and remember, regardless of skill, reduces stress up to 25%. So we're seeing this really become part of a practice, part of a brain health practice that's growing in multiple sectors. And then we're also seeing very concentrated clinical work happening with very severe PTSD and trauma and traumatic brain injuries. So, you know, the spectrum of ways and that the arts are being used to address mental health is pretty broad and pretty extraordinary. This is a program that was actually launched by David Byrne during COVID, or at the end of COVID, that really starts to look at social connection. And this program was called the Social Distance Dance Club. But what I love about it is what he was able to observe was in a very short period of time, through movement, people started to move in sync and started to trigger, I think, the social brains to connect and to really begin to look at synchronicity. So there's been a lot of work done recently around the role of music, beat, and rhythm in synchronicity in groups and how that really transfers. So there's a huge amount of possibility for research to continue in thinking about the role of music, the role of sound, and the role of dance. This is a program that they're called tune beds, and it's incorporating similarly AI, music, and vibration to be able to help to regulate the nervous system. And it's being used in recharge spaces, in businesses, in healthcare environments, where people in just 15 minutes are using these kinds of tools to really lower heart rate, to lower respiration, and to try to come back to sort of a more homeostasis place coming out of a stressful environment. And this is another example that's really being rapidly advanced to look at burnout. These recharge rooms are being developed all over the world and being placed in healthcare institutions, in libraries, in community centers. This particular one is actually being put into airports. And they're highly immersive spaces that sort of ask this question of, could 15 minutes in a highly immersive space calm your nervous system? And remarkably, we're seeing incredible states of relaxation. This is a program called Chromosonics that is in Venice, California. And it's a full body immersion that transports participants into a new awareness of perception. It fuses science with the arts through light and sound. So in this situation, you literally hear colors and you see sound. And there's now been a couple of really rigorous studies that have been done that are looking at what's happening at a neurophysiological level. And that work is going to continue. So think of these as small pods. This particular thing that you're looking at now, it's called Satellite 1. It is literally in the size of a small shipping container. So, you know, I think that's like 8 by 20, something like that. So these teeny spaces are optimizing mental health in a really interesting and I think profound way. And I think we're going to start to see more and more of this. Again, I want to come back to the science needs to make sure that what's happening here is really well validated. And I think that's where we come in. So I'm just scratching the surface on the diverse examples of NeuroArts research and practices here. But what I think is important to sort of level set is that this work is not unrealistic. It's not a pipe dream. It's not a nice to have. It's rigorous research-driven translation. And in the 2018, this journey of the work that the NeuroArts Blueprint together with the Aspen Institute began was to really start to think about how do you build this field. And so over the last 5 years, we have been implementing a really bold plan towards sustainability that really has the goal of making the arts mainstream in medicine, public health, and learning. It's really been amazing to see the generous support of visionary individuals, pioneers, philanthropists, and foundations who really recognize this work being the future and being integrated into these mainstream fields. We've had a number of really, in my lab, a family called the Peterson family has really been firm believers in this work and in many ways allowed us to do some real deep dives into I think the history and the growth of the field and what was possible. I think the arts practitioners and the researchers that have been involved in a field that is really primarily funded through philanthropy and now through the work of NIH have also created what I consider to be real and lasting systems change that's really moving us forward. So I want to end on this slide. As we move to a discussion, I'd love to invite a dialogue about how you use the arts for self-care and creative innovation, and also to talk a little bit about what Ivy and I share as an aesthetic mindset, and then also to talk a bit about how neuroaesthetics can be part of a career path for you, for your institution, and just to talk through a little bit about what that future might look like. So let me stop there and say thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for a wonderful, wonderful talk, as usual.